Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Jenifer Smith. And as Jenifer likes to say, if she's right, the way anyone shares how-to knowledge is about to change forever. Jenifer is the founder and CEO of a company called Scribe. Scribehow.com is where you want to check it out. So Jenifer is a former venture capitalist with Greylock and a former McKinsey consultant who has turned accidental CEO. She's interviewed more than 1,200 business leaders on a quest to understand everything there is to know about processes, best practices, and productivity. That's exactly the problem that Scribe solves. So right now with Scribe, she's empowering people in organizations to own their own processes by building the world's first operating system for know-how. So the reason I wanted to have Jenifer on the podcast today is because she started her journey with Scribe not too long ago, actually. And in the past year, she has raised over $30 million in funding. So she raised a seed round in January of 2021 and then raised an A round in October of 2021. So anybody that's out there in the funding game knows that's a heck of a lot of money in a short period of time, especially for an early stage company. So when I had an opportunity to interview Jenifer and ask her, like, how the heck are you raising that money? Like, what's the business behind all of this that's getting these investors excited? She said, hey, I'd love to talk about sales process and how we've grown our company from our first couple of customers through to where we are today. So in my conversation with Jenifer, I want to say I really appreciate how tactical and how detailed she went into how she handled those first enterprise sales. So some things to listen to is that while today Scribe mostly creates their customer lead flow through their product-led growth, their early customers were in fact six-figure deals. So think about a product that's now product-led. Back in when she was first selling Scribe, it was less of a product, not well built, and still converting $100,000 deals plus. Those are her first early customers. She talked about the importance of founder-led or founder everything sales for those early deals before she brought in any sales help. And she talks a lot more about that. We talked about the way of identifying who in the marketplace could use a product like hers, like who is actually in market to make that buying decision. And she talked about what she calls a top three problem. She talked about what she called another concept she called Dolphin your sales. Like, how do you raise up and kind of look at your process and then dive back down and do the selling? How do you raise up, get above the water, and then dive back down? She talks about the importance of learning at every sales call, how you're looking for patterns and data. And she also talked about the importance of hiring, making sure you avoid hiring people that tell you are managers. Managers at the early stage, typically not the best hires for your sales process, for your early stage startup. So that's what to listen for in this conversation with Jenifer. A couple of things I would love for you to do. If you haven't already, make sure you download or subscribe, I should say, to this podcast, available on Apple Podcasts and a number of other podcast platforms. Wherever you listen to the show, please do subscribe, leave us a review, let us know how we're doing. Secondly, if you have some guest topics or guest topics that you think we should cover or guests that you'd like to have in the show, let us know that too. We've got some other asks for you as we move along in this conversation. So make sure you listen for those. And in the meantime, let's head over to my conversation with Jenifer Smith. Hey, Jenifer, welcome to the Startup Selling Show. Good to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to chat.
Yeah, we were just chit-chatting a little bit before we went live, and you were the first, actually, you reminded me that we sort of kind of crossed paths in our previous lives where you were at Greylock at the same time that Blend was raising around from Greylock. So even though you and I hadn't interacted, all the people there that I got to know really well, like Nima and Aaron and the rest of the folks, and you've been to what was back then the new office.
Yeah, so Blend was a darling of the portfolio, and like what an incredible ride that you guys went through all the way to IPO.
Yeah. Well, so now they got different challenges and different hurdles, which that's life is, whether you're a pre-seed company trying to find your first customer or a public company, there's never a shortage of challenges to overcome.
You know that you say that sort of intellectually, but when we were raising our last round, I was saying to our investors, like, oh, I don't think we're quite ready. There's like these things I want to prove out on the business, really just for myself. And they said to me, Jenifer, you're going to say the same thing on the eve of your IPO. And even after that, there's always a challenge. There's always something that's broken. There's always something that you want to be fixing. So Yeah, I think it's a good reminder. You can look at a company and say, aha, victory, done. But no, it's always a
Yep.
journey.
Yeah. That next finish line is really just the starting line to the next part of the race.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, let's talk a little bit about Scribe, and maybe I just start with a really easy question just to give some people some context around who you are and why we're going to have this conversation. So, when people say, "Hey, Jenifer, what do you do?" How do you describe that?
I run a company called Scribe. We're an enterprise SaaS company based in Silicon Valley. We make software. It's a desktop application or browser extension that makes it really easy to capture and share what you know how to do. So you click the record button, you do a process that you know how to do. You click stop record, and Scribe will auto generate step-by-step written instructions with screenshots. That's basically a guide that you can use to teach anyone else how to do that process. So we're used by knowledge workers everywhere who have to explain to someone how to do something, whether that's in operations colleague who has a question, hey, how do I? Whether that's you're a sales manager and you're trying to teach your salespeople, hey, how do I enter a lead in Salesforce? Or whether you're working at a SaaS company yourself and you've got clients who are asking you, like, hey, I'm getting set up on my pilot. How do I do this? Can you show me how to do that? I personally am quite obsessed with efficiency and process. And so it's a very sort of natural flow for me. But I think it all the time is like, how can I help people better document and share processes and just be so much more efficient with their time?
Yeah, process. It's like the thing that we do here at Sales Quality is like help people build a repeatable, scalable sales process. So we'll probably use that word about 150 times between now and the end of the interview.
It's sometimes treated, thanks so much for saying that. Like it's sometimes I think treated as a four-letter word, especially around Silicon Valley, as sort of like it's the, antithesis to move fast and break things. By the way, they moved away from as a motto for a number of different reasons, but it's process so you can go faster.
Yeah. Well, and this, I mean, it comes up in all parts of the business, which we'll talk about, like even on your website on scribehow.com. You give some ideas of how people could turn a process into a step-by-step guide, which is anything from like onboarding hires to building training materials, assisting customers, some of the examples that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
I mean, this just came up. We just had a coaching call with our clients in our coaching program, and we run a call once a month called CEO Confidential. So it's a closed call, not recorded, just CEOs, and they get to talk about issues and challenges
Be a
they
fly
have.
on the wall in that room.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's fun for me, not always fun for them because they're dealing with stuff. But
Yeah.
one of the founders this morning or this afternoon was saying, like, how do I've already have an executive assistant. I need somebody to start take over billing and accounting and some other things. Like, how do I do that? And like Scribe would be a good option, right?
Yeah.
Just record what you're doing and then turn that into a process and hand it over to maybe your executive assistant or somebody else. You don't have to build a whole, Google Doc that's 25 pages long with screenshots that are going to change in 4 days.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And if you say like, oh, who should handle in that example, my billing or whatever, and someone says, oh, I know I should hire someone, but I don't have time to train them, that's a sign that you need to hire that person more. As soon as
that's exactly what this founder said, almost word for word. That's almost exactly what he said. It's like, I don't have time to hire somebody. I don't have time to train somebody.
That was really like the piece for us, which is right now it's a trade-off, right? You say, oh, I know I really need help, but I almost don't even have the time to show someone what I need them to do for me. And so with Scribe, we said, well, gosh, with technology, it doesn't have to be an either or. You could make it an and. What if just by doing the process, you can automatically capture what it is that needs to be done? Like, what if documentation were almost digital exhaust? You just do the thing you had to be doing anyways, and boom, automatically, you've now created an easy way to train other people. So that's why I get very excited about technology, because in the right set of ways, it's like it's you get to do the thing you needed to do and you get like this great efficiency benefit out the other side.
Yeah. So I'd love to talk about process in the context of sales process. So your company has grown quickly, very quickly. You've raised seed round in the beginning of 2021. And then you and I just talked about pre-show, you raised an A round in Q4. So about a year ago, was it this year? A
Yeah.
year?
Yeah, we raised it in Q3. So a little bit less
Okay.
than a year ago.
A little bit less than a year ago. So obviously, going from seed to A, and the size of the A round that you raised was north of 30 million. So that's a huge A round. And investors, we always tell our clients, like, investors are investing not necessarily in a dollar amount of revenue, but they know, like, the reason they're investing in your company on an A round is because you have some repeatability and scalability. They want to be first in to help you, start getting up that growth curve really quickly. So what I'd love to do is just sort of throw some questions at you. You can talk about how you, as a founder first, and then over time started building out a sales team. Like, how did you start building and handling your sales process, particularly around the enterprise side of the customer base that you have? So maybe like first, like on your website, right, you have a basic version and a pro version, and then the enterprise, the perfect three options for
Mhm.
everyone.
Not a
And
coincidence.
so just for context for people, as we're going into some of the Q&A around your sales process, how do you define enterprise in your world? Is it by certain price points or is it certain integrations? Like what does an enterprise deal start at dollar wise? And what does that tend to look like for your particular product and company?
It's changed over time. And I think this is like the natural evolution of going from some of your first deals and founder led sales to now getting to a repeatable process that doesn't involve me. Right. And so we started off with very high enterprise, like six-figure deals as our first sets of deals, which was really exciting. And then we had a bunch of people coming into our product in the free version of our product and saying, well, hey, we want a self-service on this. Do we have to talk to your sales team? We want a paid version. We want these sets of things. And so over time, we've introduced actually even more self-service options and we've reduced the minimums for getting into our enterprise SKU. A big part of that is thinking about the nature of our product, right? And we have oriented our product on being really, really easy to use. Like we look from the moment someone lands in on our website to the time they're able to create and share their first Scribe is under 4 minutes. And that's true
Hmm.
even for people who don't speak English. We're used in almost every country around the world. A lot of those people don't speak English and they're able to kind of figure it out. And so the natural attribute of our product is it's really easy to get up and running on it. And so we said we should make our sales the same way rather than sort of the traditional enterprise sales of jump through these 5 hoops. We have to go through all this, just go through all these sets of things. We said, no, 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 let's turn that on its head. And we want to make buying Scribe as easy as it is to use Scribe. And so we've done things like take away minimums and take away kind of a bunch of the requirements that we built in. And we push a lot of that into what is now the post sales, because a big part of any product led growth, and we're a product led growth company, is the expansion on the other side. And so a big part of this for us has been not just how do you figure out growing your sales motion over time, but how do you adapt it based on the mechanics you're seeing in your product and the motion that you're trying to drive overall across product, marketing, and sales.
I want to go back to those first couple of customers because it sounds like you maybe did it upside down in that typically a software company might say, well, we're going to get like a light version or an SME kind of version up and running, product led growth, maybe some phone calls and things as we get our feet under us with sales. And then we'll move up to mid market and then we'll move up to
Right.
enterprise. But you sort of like sold to enterprise first,
Yeah.
which was probably at the same time where the product wasn't as, say, elegant or the system wasn't so easy to use. So, like, how did you get those leads in the first place, and how were you able to get an enterprise client willing to pay $100,000 for an early stage for a product? Because that seems like the nirvana for most company
Yeah.
founders at an early stage.
Yeah, it's atypical, right? We're perhaps quite fortunate in that, we had a few kind of senior folks at big companies who I knew who had seen the product and got really jazzed about the problem that we were solving. It's something we've been talking about for a while. It's a problem space I've been thinking about for a very long time. And they shared it with friends of theirs and said, hey, I think this is something that's really interesting. And so then it kind of grew legs in a word of mouth way. And so
Okay.
all of our first customers came through basically word of mouth referrals of folks who had seen our product or had talked to us or had talked to people who had been using it before. And this was before we did, any real marketing. So it really was you either knew a user or you knew someone on the team. But it was enough to sort of get us our first foothold. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I certainly saw this when I was in venture, is buyer networks tend to be very tightly networked. Some of them, not everyone, but there are some groups of
Hmm.
buyers who really follow each other, especially CIO community. That's what I know best. And so there are sets of people where like they look to certain leaders of like, what is it that you're evaluating now? What are the problems you're getting interested in? What's the software you think that I should look at? And so
Hmm.
getting into those communities can be really helpful, especially if you have advocates there.
Okay. So, couple follow up questions on that. So you get this network, you use the word of mouth sort of approach. When you're going in there and selling to these people and it's a six-figure deal and it's not a very, it's still a relatively early stage company,
Yeah.
what is the specific problem that you help them identify? Like, were you replacing a legacy system that wasn't working very well? Was it more that you were replacing pen and paper and sort of Google Docs? Either way, either you're switching from another platform, there's a high switching cost to that. If you're switching from Google Docs and the way we've always done it to this new way, there's a high switching cost because you got to get everybody on board with actually using the product. So presumably to get somebody to pay six figures or more, there must be like a really big issue and a challenge. Like, how did they know this was an issue? Did they know this is a problem and they were looking for a solution? Or did you help educate them? Like, what's the sort of chicken and the egg there with those early
Yeah,
customers?
it's such a great question. And it's just true for every company. Like, change is hard, regardless of what you're replacing. Change is hard, and to me, so much of sales is telling a story of that change, right? There's like some kind of activation energy. It can be quite high of you've got to, to make a change. What is on the promised land of the other side, right? What is it that you get out of this? And it was different for different buyers. We met some buyers who said, hey, like we've actually gone through and quantified this problem. Like we track how our
Hmm.
people spend time. We find that they spend 10 to 15% of their week just asking each other questions on how to do their job, like literally, hey, can you
Wow.
show me how to do this thing, or trying to find it on their own and figure it out on their own. And when you're talking about companies at any real scale, 10 to 15% of your knowledge workers' time is huge, right? When multiplied by the number of people. And so it was a really big pain point to them. We have other customers who haven't gotten to that, that part of the journey. I think that's probably more atypical, to find a buyer who has really quantified it and said, this is what it's worth to us. But everyone intuitively gets the problem, right? When you say to them,
Yeah.
like, hey, do your people have places to go when they have questions on how to do nitty gritty? Like, I'm sure you've got great training when someone shows up in the front door. I'm sure you have, when they first join a job, I'm sure you have, big L&D, sort of thing. But then what happens as soon as they're butt in seat, like day one, week one, month one, year one, and they need to actually fingers on keyboard, do the mechanics of your job? How do they learn? Where do they learn to do that?
Hmm.
And the answer is we still mostly rely on apprenticeship, right? It's
Yep.
still mostly like
Yeah.
your head over the proverbial cubicle, or pinging someone on Slack, or, asking someone to hop on a Zoom call with you. And I always call it the like sort of elephant in the room problem, but it's hiding in plain sight, which is people just assume that's the cost of doing business. Well,
Yep.
yeah, that's a big drain on our time. And by the way, I spent all this time training these people, and then they up and leave every day at 5 p.m. And I got to hope that they come back, and the great
Right.
resignation is coming, and maybe they
Yeah.
won't. And then what do I do with all that knowledge that's in their heads? I've now lost that, right? So now I got to build in these redundancies. And like, that's not good either. So every leader understands this problem, at least intuitively, even if they haven't quantified it. But I think they just sort of assumed this is the way that things are, right? And it takes having a real kind of challenge or conversation saying, well, what if it didn't have to be that way? Like, what if I told you we could automatically capture what your people know how to do? What if I told you the cost of process documentation went down to nearly zero? What would you do if suddenly all of your processes were documented? Right now, less than 1% or of the things that are getting done in your company, creating value every day, are written down. What if you could get that number even up to 10%? What would happen then? What could you do with that? And then you meet buyers where they're at, right? And sort of see like where they go down that kind of journey together. And that'll look different for different people. But I think so much of sales, when you're selling something that is new, especially if it's a new category, is like helping them even understand just how much pain they have in the existing world, and like what
Hmm.
it could look like if you could take that away, because they won't have done that thought exercise yet.
So I'm going to keep diving into this because so
Yeah.
now you have these early adopters that are like, yes, we've done this evaluation, which probably on a scale of company, like how many companies have actually taken the time to do this sort of efficiency analysis?
Very
Probably
few.
not a ton, very
Yep.
few. So these are people that are clearly problem aware as opposed to the rest of the market. They might be, have some pain with it. They're sort of vaguely, yeah, okay, it takes a lot of time to train people and it's a pain. These are people that said, no, we know it's costing us 10 to 15% of our employee time. Even there, they might go, well, yeah, this thing is important and it's a big cost, but we're also switching out our CRM, or we're opening up a new office in Europe, or we have this priority or that priority. So, yeah, this is a big cost, and 10% could equal, say, $30 million in productivity. But we actually got like five other problems that are worth $100 million each that are top above this one. So I'm just curious if you like, how did you then get them to take that action, even the ones that were highly educated about the problem? Because even there, you could hit the resistance and say, well, we're going to kick the can, or we'll just try something else that's a less of a marginal change. It's like a little shift, or we'll try using Google Docs, we'll try using something else first before we make this big switch and make this big investment.
Yeah, we had a saying in Venture, which is we only wanted to invest in companies that were solving a top three problem for their buyers. And if you aren't
Oh,
solving one of their top three priorities, then you're kind of a nice to have. And that's going to be like a tough uphill battle. And so my answer to your question is you don't try to add to their list of priorities, right? We will say, especially for the bigger deals, like try to really understand what are your top three priorities? What is it that you're trying to drive through? And does Scribe help you solve one of those? So we're implementing a new CRM. That's actually a common one that we see, or you can replace CRM with whatever your favorite category of software is, right? Everyone's always got something. Okay, well, how are you going to do enablement and adoption on that new platform? Like, what does success look like? Okay, everyone's up and running and they know how to use it and they find the answers they need. And there's, okay, well, how are you going to do that? Like tactically, let's talk through. How are you going to create the documentation for that? Like who's creating that? Who has the knowledge? How do they need to spread that? And so much of it for us in the sales process is like, can Scribe help you solve the things that you're trying to do? And if not, if there's like no story there, then, great, let's talk in a year. If things change, give us a call. Here's our free product. Meantime, like knock yourself out if it helps you on any projects that come up along the way. And that's been really great too, because we've had some companies that, have said, oh, hey, not now. We've got these other things going on. Scribe doesn't help us solve those. And then pockets of people in the company have just started using the product. And then it's grown legs over time. And then eventually they start agitating to have, more usage. They run up against some of our limits. And then we'll get a phone call back from the CIO that's like, hey, can we re-engage?
Right. Okay. All right, folks, we are off and running in my conversation with Jenifer Smith. So we're talking lots about sales process. That's the theme of our conversation today. Guess what? That's what we do every single day here at Sales Quality is we help early stage B2B tech startups, companies selling to the enterprise. We help those founders and their early teams build a repeatable, scalable sales process. That's what we do with our coaching program, Selling. And that's what we do each and every day with founders just like you listening to this podcast. So if you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, or even if we can help you, or maybe most of all, you just want to hop on a call and have a quick brainstorm to figure out where you might have some gaps or opportunities to improve your sales process so you can start moving towards repeatability and scalability, let's have a quick chat. Easy thing to do, just shoot me an email, Scott@salesqualia. That's Scott@salesqualia, QUALIA.com. Just type the word chat into the subject line. That'll let me know you want to have a quick chat. My assistant will pick up that email. She'll help us schedule a time. We'll hop on the phone, have a quick chat, brainstorm some ideas, figure out if or how we can help you out and talk about your sales process. So that's it for now. Shoot me an email, Scott@salesqualia.com, subject line chat. Let's have a chat, talk about your process, and let's head over to more talk about process with Jenifer Smith. And so how much of that, the early stage, right, getting those first few big customers, how much of that was like Jenifer, the sales rep, versus having any kind of support or team around you? Like, were you literally doing every email, every demo, answering every question, following up with decks, all that stuff? Or did you have anybody at that first, like think about those first 3 or first 10 customers?
Yeah, the first 3 were all me. So like very, very much founder led. We brought in a sales leader pretty early on after that. Like once we started to see some of these like really encouraging early proof points to scale it out more. But I remain really heavily involved for quite a while. I think that's quite important really for any company. I see a lot of startups and I completely understand the inclination, especially if you have a CEO or a founder who doesn't come from a sales background or isn't naturally comfortable with sales, to say, oh, okay, I need to grow revenue. I'll just hire a sales leader or I'll just hire, my first salesperson and they'll figure out how to sell this product. And like, they could be the best salesperson in the world. They're never going to sell it as good as a founder could off the bat, because when you have a completely unknown brand, probably a half-baked product and all these other things that go along with it, you're selling a vision more than anything else, right? And that really has to come from the founder. And if you aren't good at being able to communicate that and, get your first set of customers, I think it's quite unreasonable to expect someone else to be able to come in, even if they're the best sales professional, and be able to do that for you.
That's a mic drop moment. I'm just like, you almost have me in tears right now, because I can't tell you how many times I've tried to explain that to founders. Like you got to get those first customers on your own. You have to be willing to go out there and sell. I know you don't know how to do that. I know you don't know how to sell. That doesn't matter. You have to go out and figure it out and learn it, because then you're not even going to know what kind of sales leader to hire or what kind of sales process you need to build. Like you've got to go in there and do that yourself.
There's a whole bunch of things you have to figure out yourself. Like what kind of person am I selling to? What does the sales motion look like? What kind of deal size am I targeting? Because you're totally right. Depending on the motion, you could hire very different sets of people and build in very different directions. And
Hmm.
ideally, you want to have a point of view on what that is when you're bringing in your first salesperson.
Yeah, and even like what kinds of companies are going to target. You've got this software that's like effectively ubiquitous across any industry, which is like awesome. We can sell to everyone. But on the other hand, there's probably early customers, even now, as you're still getting into that true scale up stage, you're probably still targeting, I'm assuming, certain types of customers or industries or segments. So did you find early on that there was a little bit of a trend like, okay, we know we could sell to everyone down the road, but for now, either those first 10 or even now, wherever you're at on that growth journey, if you found there's certain segments that are best to focus in on for now, and then you've got other segments that are going to be the later segments.
Yeah, we very much took an opinion of let the market guide us and see where we have pull. So I talk all the time about how sales, marketing, really anything that we're doing at the company should feel like pushing a boulder downhill. My team looked at me like very confused because they're sort of like building a company is really hard. Like, of course, this should feel hard, right? We should feel like we're pushing a boulder uphill. But you really want to find where are the paths of least resistance. Where do you feel like
Mm-hmm.
you're getting the most pull from the market, where it's the easiest conversation with customers, where they already get what you're talking about, where they get really excited about the product, where they're able to buy faster, make decisions fast, all these sets of things. And so our goal very early on was to cover a broad surface area. So you could almost think about it like going into a field and like planting a ton of seeds and then sort of being
Mm-hmm.
unopinionated and waiting for the rain and seeing like which flowers bloomed and then running to that patch and saying, gosh, this must be like a richer patch. And so that's what we did. We'd had conversations with all different kinds of companies and we saw patterns emerge. I think not surprisingly, we saw companies that are in industries where their business is about, as I would paraphrase, execution of repeatable processes done at scale, accurately, efficiently, and compliantly. Think financial services, think insurance, think healthcare, think of these like, kind of big companies that have to do things a certain way. We saw a really natural pull there, right? And so, you could just very simply look at the data or even just intuitively check in with yourself and say, like, which of my conversations in the last week have felt easier, right? It sometimes doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And you say, gosh, that's probably an area where, I should just lean into a little bit more and see what happens. Now you have to weigh that across a bunch of things. For us working with financial services companies, like they tend to move slower than say technology companies, right? And so we've got a mix of different kind of companies that we will target and work with because we're trying to balance.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. I think at Blend, we kind of did that. I mean, of course, we weren't selling to like that. You didn't have like a truly ubiquitous product, and that we were selling mortgage lending software. So we were already kind of deciding, okay, we're going to sell into the mortgage lenders. But even within mortgage lenders, there's 8,000 plus mortgage lenders across the United States, starting with Wells Fargo, all the way down to Golden One Credit Union around the street. Then you have your bank lenders and you have your non-bank lenders, and then you have brokers. So even within that 8,000, which seems relatively small compared to, like a larger, universal kind of market, there were subsegments there. And so we did a similar approach, at least in the very beginning. It was like, we're going to talk to a lot of different lenders. Our very first contract ended up not even being a lender. Our first contract was Freddie Mac. And we were able to sole source a large $400,000 deal because they needed to use the data analysis part of the product that we built in order to solve a problem. And we knew the executive there really well from the Blend team's time at Palantir and my time at Altos Research when I was there. Not even a lender, but we're like, you know what? It's Freddie Mac. It's a big logo. Let's just see where this goes. The second contract we signed was for $100. So we went from 400,000 to 100. And it was kind of like, wait, I think I'm moving in the opposite direction here. But it was a startup lender who wanted to have a customer first experience. So like, we could use your workflow software. This would be awesome. Well, it turns out that neither of them were ideal customers because Freddie Mac wasn't a lender. They were just using the data platform. The small lender, while it was exciting, number one, they were actually hard to implement with because they were so thin on people and resources. We couldn't even get their time and attention to build the workflows the way they wanted it. And so we ended up looking at, okay, the total market is 800 or 8,000 mortgage lenders, but you look at the top 50, the top 100, they're doing 90% of the loans or more.
Yeah.
So for us to make the big impact we wanted to make, we decided, really, Nima ultimately said, for now, we're only going to sell to the top 100 lenders. And I had spent like 6 to 9 months building pipeline, having conversations with all different kinds of lenders. These are people I was doing demos with. They're getting excited about what's to come. And then at one point he's like, you got to tell them we're not selling to them now. I was like, dude, you're killing me. Right. I just built pipeline and I got to go tell a bunch of these people like, we can't work with you for now. But that's what we needed to do. We had to go through that exercise in order to figure out where we're going to make the biggest impact. And getting 4 really big customers was way, way more important and impactful for the industry and the story.
Power law.
Yeah. And then we could get 100 credit unions and every VC and everybody in the market would be like, yeah, so what? As compared to getting First Republic, Nation Star, Wells Fargo, Freedom Mortgage. So I think that's a really good lesson.
This is part of what's really fun about doing sales for early stage too, where like you haven't figured out what is the repeatable motion yet, where I just put more gas in and more fire comes out the other side. And it's doing this dolphining, right? Where like you're in the weeds, you've dove down, like you're doing deals all day long, having conversations, whatever. But then it's having to pop your head back up and say, okay, I've now had X number of conversations. Like, what have I learned?
Yep.
Which customers, like not all customers are created equal. Some are better than others, right? Which ones are easier to sell to? Which ones are going to be a bigger deal when we sell to them? Which ones are going to be like less demanding once we've sold to them? Who are going to be happier, healthier customers out the other side? Like there's all these sets of questions to be asking. And I think that's like part of the really fun motion, but it's a different skill set than, someone who's been, a rep at you pick your favorite kind of big company and has only ever been the dove down part. Right. And so like something I'm always pushing our sales team to do now in our sales team meetings every week and more asynchronously is, what did you learn? Like, let's talk really tactically. You've had X conversations this week. Like, what patterns are you noticing? We said we were going to test this kind of messaging or like focus on this kind of customer more, whatever the theme is that we're doing at the time. Like, what is it that you're learning from that? What are we going to do differently based on what we just learned? Can we compound those learnings across the team together? And it's a different muscle, I think, than, a lot of people are used to when you're just like in the hustle every day trying to get deals done,
Yeah, we have a saying where the client said implementing equals learning. The only way you're going to know if something works is to actually go implement on it.
Yeah.
Because then you're going to either get the result you want, you're either going to win or you're going to learn. And then you modify and adapt and change. So you went through this transition. So you got your first couple enterprise customers, effectively Jenifer, the CEO / sales rep / sales assistant. And then you brought in the sales
/ accountant / sure. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The founder, everything, right? How did you know to look for a sales leader? Like, what did that person look like? How did you know it was a good match for you and the company at that point? And from there, I want to talk a little bit more about going from founder everything or founder led into more of a founder less selling process. But let's start with that first sales hire, that sales leader.
Yeah. I think what you'll look for will really depend on where you are as a business and what you're trying to solve for. For us at the time, it was a bit of a like generalist athlete because we said, hey, we've signed these like first few contracts. This looks really exciting. We're really getting these really great proof points. Like here's where we see the opportunity. But we also realize like we don't know what we don't know. Like we're going to have to build out a sales team over time. We're going to have to we got to figure out what this motion is. We're pattern matching off of a small number of N. We need to get to a bigger N quickly and then pattern match off of that. And so for us, the right answer was sort of like a generalist athlete and someone we thought over time would be able to build out and scale under him. There are different schools of thought on how you bring in your first salesperson. And frankly, I've argued both sides in different circumstances. So I don't know that there's like a one size kind of fits all. I remember we even had a business school case on this, back in the day, and like half was split between half people being like, bring someone on. And this is true, not just of sales, any of your kind of early hires, right? Do you bring in someone who can be like a player coach and, over time can scale the lead? Or do you bring someone in who's really just sort of like scrappy and can get stuff done, figure it out, and then you assume you hire in leadership over time? I think it really just depends on, where you're at and what you're trying to solve for, and also the skills of the other people on the team and how they can kind of supplement. For us, it was kind of like, that general athlete who could kind of play all roles coming in. Those people are very hard to find.
Yes, they are hard to find. I feel like I'm probably one of those people myself because I came into Blends early, even before we had any customers or revenue. They actually brought me in to help them co-sell. But to what you did, right?
Like for you joining, was that scary? Was that exciting? Both?
It definitely felt like the right thing to do. My wife is a PhD economist and I have a master's in economics. So we actually looked at it from expected value standpoint. So I was working at CoreLogic, which is a publicly traded company. I was completely miserable. I was working at this company for like a year and a half to kind of take a break from the startup game, but I was completely miserable. I hated the job. It was just boring. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to get back into the sort of the startup world again. We're like, okay, so I can continue making $400,000 a year at CoreLogic, or I can earn $100,000 base salary with no bonuses other than equity to work at Blend. And oh, by the way, commute 2.5 hours each way to San Francisco.
Seems like an obvious choice.
It seems like an obvious choice, but I was like, when I came on board, it was even seed round. It was before they actually closed an A. But we looked at it and we were like, look, I know these guys from Palantir because they were customers of mine when I was at Altos. So I knew Nima, I knew Roscoe. And Lena and I looked at this, we're like, these guys are smart guys. We know they can raise money. They're going to figure something out. And I literally said, if they're going to figure something out, I want to be part of that rocket ship. I want to be on board. That was the decision matrix. And now, of course, now looking back, it's easy to say that was a great decision. But at the time, it actually felt like the right decision for me at my time. Because I was like, I just needed that kind of environment to thrive and do the things I wanted to do. But in my case, I was also a doer. Like I knew I wasn't getting hired to build a team. I was getting hired to like prove the product could be sold.
Right.
So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm going to conferences, I'm talking to people, I'm doing cold calls, using my network to get introductions and meetings. And it's true, like many times people hire a sales leader, which technically I was, but I was actually the sales rep. And so I was going to ask you, your sales leader that you hired, was this person very tactical and willing to get going and actually do some of the selling? So by title, it was a sales leader, but they're actually a sales rep.
Yeah. You have, I mean, I think this is true, not just for hiring your first salesperson, but sort of your first anything. Like if someone self-identifies as a manager first, they're the wrong first hire. They're probably even the wrong like second or third hire, right? In that particular department.
Interesting.
Because there's not that much to manage, right? It's all about doing things quickly and pattern matching and figuring out, okay, I did this. I went to this conference. I spoke to these set of people. Like, what did I learn from that? Should I be doing more of that or less of that in the future? Or something else that would be higher ROI? And you're constantly making those kinds of decisions. And that's a very different skill set than, how do I manage a high performing team at Google or something, right? And so like we very much look for and tell people when we hire them, if they've managed people before, sort of in that role, like this is not that. If you want more of that, that's wonderful. There's a million people who will hire you. Go do that instead. I'm sure you can make a lot of money. The kind of people who came here are people who said, I think a very similar story to what you shared just now with me about, where you were at. They're like, look, I've done these things. Like I've seen success in that. I have this feeling that I want more. I want to build something. I want to like every time I've come in, something's already been set up for me. I want to test what this looks like when it's just me and there's no foundation. I'm like, what can I build? What can I do when, I'm just kind of like relying on myself. And you listen for like those sounds of like scrappiness and builder orientation. Not like, oh, hey, I just like want to take something and scale it, which can be great, by the way, but you've got to be at that stage of company. You got to be honest with yourself and look in the mirror and be like, do I have repeatability? And if you were wondering if you have repeatability, you do not have repeatability. Like you will know if you have it. And that can be a very different profile of person than like the person who's going to help get you your first million, 2 million, 3 million.
So what was if there was an order of operations, we're talking about process, what was the process to build the process, if you will? So you go from founder led, you bring in the sales leader, and then you're assumably starting to look for that repeatability in terms of customer segment, messaging, of course, repeatability around that, but also just fundamentally, like how do we get leads? How do we convert deals? What's our pipeline playbook look like? How do we think about pricing? How did that start to emerge where you go from like shooting from the hip, founder everything, to now moving towards this more repeatable process so that you can get the team in place down the road?
Yeah. It's a lot of data gathering and experimentation along the way. And I would say like, this is a really important point that I say a lot. And if I look back now, what we didn't do as good of a job of as we should have, of like really being quite rigorous in our data gathering of like, what conversations have we had across what industries, company size, like all the things that you want to be pattern matching on. And then look, you can do this in a quite data driven way. What are your conversion rates across each of those things? And so part of the process for us was increasing our end size. Like, how do you have more conversations faster, close more deals quicker? And, I mentioned like we were doing really big deals in financial services. Those do not close in 2 weeks. Those take a long time, right? And I would argue you learn practically nothing until someone has actually signed a document and is using your product, which can happen much later than when they've even signed that document, right? So you're talking about a much longer cycle. And so part of the push for us too was like, how do we think about the data that we would need to be able to even start to say if we were being successful or not? And so we then kind of reversed engineered and said, okay, great for us to have a portfolio of some of these like longer bets. In the meantime, we're going to go after some of these quicker wins. So we just can start to understand, like in a shorter period of time, what is our average time to close? What is our average cycle? What are our average number of calls? Like all those kinds of metrics that you want to be tracking. And so, especially for folks doing like enterprise sales, I wish we'd thought about this even sooner, is like, think about what's the data that you would need to be able to get to repeatability and almost like backwards engineer and make sure like the process that you're running gets you to that point. Because you probably even saw this at Blend, like you're selling to really, if you're saying our strategy is to go after the 10 biggest lenders, like those are really long conversations. So you've probably got a while. I'm curious what it was like for you guys kind of sitting around. You kind of got a while being like, is this thing working or not? Like they're talking to us. They seem really interested. That's great. But there's a lot of customers who are willing to talk to you for really long periods of time.
Totally.
They're probably not great customers and may or may not buy. So that's really like, to me, not a sign until you actually have something in place. So like, I'm curious how you guys thought about it in that really long sales cycle.
Yeah.
Lower N also, 10 customers or something you're going after environment.
Well, it was roughly 100. So because Universe was small, we actually could take a lot of time per account to kind of think through, okay, what's our entry point? Who do we know? Who do our, like Hans Morris was an early investor from Nika Partners. He knew, he was a chief credit officer at Visa. So he's like, okay, if you want introductions, I can help you. I can get you the intro. After that, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And really, it was just kind of going down the road of a sales process with those companies, but also trying to figure out quickly, is this really a now thing, or is this just what Hans used to say to me is you have to be very careful to avoid interesting conversations. He said, there's no shortage of interesting conversations. Everyone's going to want to see the new thing.
Yeah.
So your job, Scott, is to make sure who is actually interested in taking action as opposed to seeing the demo. And so we'd spend a lot of time in Disco. Like I would spend 2 months with several executives before we even show the product, partly because it wasn't done, but partly because we had to figure out if this thing was real, like a real opportunity. And we actually had a situation where we flew all the way to Chicago. We brought Nima, Justin, Pranay, and me, the 4 people, different. Justin's engineering, Pranay's product, Nima, CEO, and me in sales. And we sat down with a very large top 15 bank. And after a 4-hour meeting in 2014, the end of the meeting, they said, great, I think we want to put this in the 2017 roadmap. And we're like, that's like 2.5 years from now. They said, well, we have this big IT integration. We're doing this migration over, doing this, we're doing that. Like, we just don't have capacity. We're like, okay, cool. Like, there's no sale here for now. And that's fine. But you're sort of like trying to discover that urgency or finding the early adopters, like in your case, those people that you sold to that had data that say that we know we're losing 10 to 15% efficiency because of the time that's being spent teaching stuff. Like, hey, if people said, hey, we want to be more like Quicken Loans, and we have this as a company priority to get something up and running now. Okay, cool. We're going to spend more time with you. And then we work quickly into a paid pilot. So we knew that they're actually serious about putting their money down. And those pilots were $50,000. We did one with First Republic. It was $150,000 just for a pilot. But they were willing to spend that money. We're like, okay, now we know you're serious.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet everyone who has sold to big companies has some version of your Chicago story. For us, it was like one of the really big banks, and we're working with a C-level person, and like this was they had mapped out the pain. It was like all the great things you could possibly ask for. We scoped out the pilot. The bar for success was so low that we actually would be like, can you be a little more ambitious here? And we scope out the whole thing. And then we get to the end of it and they're like, okay, great. Like, we think we can do this like end of next year. And I remember I had to like write back the email and be like, was that a typo? Did you mean like end of this year in 9 months from now? And they're like, no, we mean like in 18 months.
Yeah. That's just the timelines to deal with. We're like, okay, now we know. So then I know we have a couple minutes left. So then when going back to this process piece and you got the data and you start looking for repeatability, like what parts of the selling process from say filling the funnel through, lead qualification, discovery, demo, objections, integrations, all that stuff. How did you know where to start documenting process and then even further, okay, now you have a process. When did you know when to start hiring people to take over those? Was there a
Yeah.
certain like order of operations on that?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we are a process documentation company. And so we started documenting process as soon as we said, hey, this is something we would want someone else to do someday.
Okay.
So when we're in the early days of like, you're just kind of figuring it out, right? You're experimenting with different stuff. We'll scope out with intentionality, like, hey, we're going to try doing this. Here's the data we're going to collect on the other side, but we're not going to write out all the work we do in
Mm,
between, right? But as soon as you get to a point where we said, like, okay, we're going to hire more people, like, we think that this is now like the repeatable motion, that's when we then invested in documenting it out. I mean, we do that across an entire company as well. Like I'll have founders who come to us and say, "Oh, hey, I want to start using Scribe when like we're one person because we're like growing and scaling." And I'm like, "That's great. All the documentation you create now like is not going to be what you use even in 5 months. Like everything will have changed, and that's okay. By the way, like with our product, it takes 56 seconds to create a Scribe on average. That's the average time. So who
yeah.
cares? All right, that's fine. Like go to
Right.
town on it." But when you're talking about, much more sort of like lengthy documentation and the way that people think about it traditionally, like you want to invest in it when there's going to be an audience on the other side and someone to receive it and get value from it.
Yeah. And so were there certain parts of the sales process? Was it hiring SDRs to do lead gen? Was it customer success on the back end? What were some of the places that you started first to go from, okay, you went from founder everything to founder led with a sales leader. Now you're starting to build a team. Were there certain team members that you knew to hire first because you had some repeatability?
Yeah, we hired an SDR first because we were working all inbound leads and we said, oh, hey, what would this look like if we did outbound? And then
Okay.
pretty quickly realized like outbound leads are worse than the folks who are just coming inbound. And we had enough of them. We said, like, let's just do that instead. So then we switched to an inbound only strategy. And the place where we, I think invested in building out process the most was on the customer success side. And that's a
Hmm.
product of our motion, again, because it is very much a land and expand and just like get people in the front door of the product. And so there's like some basic stuff that we did, sort of on the sales side and getting folks through, but then really like the highest data is on the customer success side because then we have data not just on you as a customer, but also your usage of the product and
Hmm.
what that looks like. And so we can start to do some really interesting things based on what we're seeing, in our analytics, not even having talked to us. And so that's been a place where we've invested a lot. And that has then informed, almost going backwards, the kinds of customers that we sell to. Because now we look at who are our healthiest customers on the other side. When you take, I think one of the benefits of being able to take kind of a holistic view on customers is like the people who are easiest to get in the front door or sign the fastest or, have the biggest, ASP are not always the healthiest customers on the other side. And so like we were fortunate to be able to start from perspective, like what does healthy look like? What does that mean for usage? What does that mean for alignment with our product, right? You could sell a customer on a dream that's not what your product actually is. And that's maybe great for that salesperson's commission, but not good for the company overall. And so we started from the opposite of like, what does great look like of someone who is up and running on Scribe and seeing a lot of success and primed for expansion? And now let's look backwards in our funnel from the inbound leads that are coming
Hmm.
in and say like, okay, which of those do we want to be prioritizing? And what kind of deal and sales cadence do we want to structure and put them through to get them there? And we become much more opinionated over time. I think our first few customers we were sort of like, well, how do you want to buy? We'll sort of meet you where you're at. Like you tell us what your process looks like. And now we're much more opinionated, right? We're like, there's a way to buy Scribe. This is what it typically
Yeah.
looks like, and we'll help you if that doesn't fit, if you want to do things a different way. But I'll say like 95% of buyers are like relieved because, they're not, unless you're selling to procurement, they're not procurement professionals. Like they're just trying to solve a problem in their business. And if you are telling them, hey, I can just help you get through this process faster and easier. I designed it to be really simple. I'll hold your hand through it. You almost hear like an audible sigh of relief from them, right? They're like, okay,
That's
one less
so
thing I have
true.
to
I
worry
mean,
about.
we tell our clients all the time, like, you have to remember that people you're selling to actually don't know how to buy your product.
Yeah,
Like if they get 10 new employees, cool, I can requisition laptops, no problem. I can get 10 more Zoom licenses. I know how to buy those things. You're asking me to buy a product like Scribe it's a new category. They don't know how to buy it. So it's our responsibility as a seller to have a process for selling so that we can just walk them through. And then to your point, it's like, oh, thank God you know how to like get this thing through my procurement team because I sure as hell don't know how to do it because I've never bought anything like it.
right.
And it gives you a
Yeah,
lot
we
more
see this all the
control.
time.
Yep. Okay. Well, look, man, we've covered like 10% of what I thought we could cover based on the start of our conversation.
So verbose.
No, it's because there's so much here. Like everything that you talked about is so applicable to early stage founders. And I know you're still going through it yourself every day, which is why it's such a great conversation to have with you. So maybe we can work with your team and find a time to do a part 2 or 3 or something like that.
Yeah,
based on your availability. Yeah. So as we wrap up here, I know you've got to jump and I want to be respectful of your time. Where's the best place for people to go to check out Scribe? I know you have the website scribehow.com. What should people do if they want to check out more about what you do and how y'all do it?
Yeah, go to the website and try the product. Like I said, it takes 4 minutes to get up and running. And next time someone asks you, hey, how do I do something? You've got a client who's asking you like, hey, can you show me how do I do this in your software? Just send them a Scribe and try it out for yourself. The product's completely free.
Okay.
We can also share a promo code for folks who are interested to upgrade to the paid product. And then folks who want to connect with me, I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm Jenifer Smith, which is probably not that searchable on its own. But if you type in Jenifer Smith Scribe, I should be the only one that comes up.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put the links to your LinkedIn. I know your website as well. Make sure people can check you out. I think that's a great reminder. Like the next time somebody asks you, how do I do blah? Then pick up Scribe and do that. So could be a sales process internally, could be how do I add something to my CRM? Customer example is a good one. Maybe you're going to hire a new person, whatever that is, find something really specific and use it, because then in 4 minutes, you're going to have it done and you're probably going to fall in love with the product. So
that's exactly it.
Cool. Well, again, Jenifer, thank you so much for your time and more importantly, your willingness to share your journey and what you're on from founder-led to founderless, and hopefully at some point getting the IPO done. So we'll see how that goes.
Thanks so much, Scott.
All right. We'll talk soon. Cheers. All right, folks, that's a wrap. Once again, I want to remind you to take advantage of this conversation I'm willing to have with you. If you're building out your repeatable, scalable sales process, you want to know what that means. You're trying to figure out what the order of operations should be. You're trying to figure out like what processes should I have in place before I start bringing in a sales team? How do I know when it's time to hire somebody on our sales process? Those are all questions that we can handle in a quick chat that I call a situation session. Send me an email, scott@salesqualia.com. Just type the word chat into the subject line. My assistant will pick that email up. We'll get a time on the books and we'll have a quick chat about your sales process. All right, that's it for now on this latest episode of the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. Until next time, have an awesome day and keep selling. See ya.